today our conversation is with two modern health therapists, Dr. Sam Himelstein and Dr. Mica Gonzalez, who are going to talk to us about family resilience during this difficult time. Before I pass it over to them, I wanted to give a really quick disclaimer. The content in this webinar is for educational purposes only. It's not intended to be a substitute for professional advice, diagnosis, or treatment. Please contact your healthcare provider for clinical needs and never disregard professional mental health advice or delay seeking it because of something you've heard in this webinar. Awesome. With that, I will pass it over to our wonderful therapists to introduce themselves.
Great. Well, thank you for the introduction. Really excited to be here. As Haley said, my name is Dr. Sam Himelstein. I'm just going to give you a quick overview of who I am, and my partner Mica will do the same before we get into the content. I'm a licensed psychologist here in the state of California. I provide both in-person therapy and telehealth therapy through HIPAA-compliant video counseling. I specialize mainly in working with children, teenagers, and their families. It's probably what I'm best known for, but I also work with adults too, and I specialize in mindfulness. I specialize in self-awareness and other contemplative skills that help things like addiction, stress, trauma. And I think the last thing I'll say about myself is the reason I ultimately became a therapist is because I had my own struggles growing up. I was involved in the juvenile justice system. I got in a lot of trouble. I was going down the wrong path with drugs, with alcohol, with trauma and my own issues. And I was very blessed and honored to be able to have some of my own mentors and therapists and parents help me. And I was able to change my life around, and that ultimately brought me to the doorstep of being a therapist. And so I'm absolutely on fire and passionate about working with people to help them heal, to help them learn new skills, and particularly to help parents who are dealing with their teenagers and children to help them build what we're going to call in this webinar familial resilience. So thank you so much for having me. I'm going to pass it on to Mica.
Hi, everyone. I'm Dr. Mica Gonzalez, and I work at Family First Psychotherapy with Sam. And really, what I feel like I've kind of always been a little psychologist in training. I didn't, when I was a kid, I didn't get in as much trouble as Sam did, but always just curious about how people work. And so I feel like in a way I was destined for this to become a psychologist. But when I started my graduate training, right away, I realized, wow, this is hard. And whatever natural skills I had with people weren't enough to actually help the kind of people that were having really major struggles. And so I decided I needed to go back to the earliest days to see, what happens in those early relationships between babies and toddlers and preschoolers and their parents. And so that took me to early childhood mental health. And for the better part of the last 8 years, that's been my focus. I've been learning things like child-parent psychotherapy, which is an evidence-based practice for working with children 0 to 5 and their parents. And of course, in particular, since Sam and I started Family First, I've been working with older kids and teenagers and their parents as well. Doing a lot of the kind of parent coaching that so many parents need because, as they say, parenting is the toughest job in the world. And so right now my practice is a balance between working with kids and their parents, as well as individual adults struggling with depression, anxiety, and trauma. And of course, there's more to say, but we'd like to really get into the content now. So I'll pass it back to Haley. Where's Sam?
I think to Sam.
Yeah, exactly. So what I'll do is I'm going to share my screen now, and that will get us into our content. So hopefully everyone is seeing a slide right now that says managing anxiety and boosting familial or family resilience in uncertain times. And I just want to make sure my clicker is working. There we go. Okay. So you already heard about me and Mica. I'm just going to give you just the very brief overview of what we're going to do today in this short webinar. In this first part, I'm going to cover individual parental resilience and self-care. And then about halfway through, and probably about 20 or 25 minutes from now, I'm going to kick it off to Mica, and he's going to cover the family side of it. And the reason we're starting with individual parental resilience is because in our conceptual map, it's really important to know that you you as a parent or an individual in your family system has a big impact on that system. And sometimes it's easy for us as parents. One of the things Mica and I didn't say is we're also both parents too. We both have two children, two kids, I guess. It can be easy to put others before yourself. And it's kind of ironic that, in fact, some of the best work you can do is take care of yourself first so that you can better take care of others around you. So this is the overview. I'm going to hop right into the content now. And I want to start with the stress and trauma response. I'm going to give a very, very brief overview of this because I don't want to get too much on a tributary. It's just important to know how our nervous systems interact with stress. So you're looking at this very nice picture here on the left of this person with this yellow nerve that's going all throughout from the bottom of their ear to their gut. And that's called the vagus nerve. I'm going to come back to that in a moment. You might already know that our central nervous system is broken down into a couple different parts. And one of the parts of the central nervous system is called the autonomic nervous system, the ANS. And that's further broken down into the sympathetic nervous system and the parasympathetic nervous system. The sympathetic nervous system is what gets activated when we get stressed out. So when we feel stress in our environment, in our bodies, if there's any type of threat or danger or anything like that, our hearts tend to pound faster. We start to get stressed out. Our body gets ready to go and to move in some way. On the other side of the spectrum is the parasympathetic nervous system, and that's what gets activated when we feel relaxed. In fact, when our parasympathetic nervous system is activated, we actually call that in the professional field the relaxation response, also sometimes known as the rest and digest system, because that's what happens to your body when you're, fully digesting food, when your body is relaxed, to feel that sense of calm. Now, one of the things I want to go over here, just very, very briefly, I love to talk about this at length, and we just don't have time to do it today, is that under your brain, if you can still see me in the corner, I'm holding my two fists up like a brain. Under our brain, we have 12 cranial nerves, and those 12 cranial nerves make us as mammals very, very different than reptiles, and also differentiate us as humans from other mammals. And one of the most important nerves is called the vagus nerve. And that's what's being exemplified here by this yellow nerve in this picture. It goes all the way up from under the brain down into the gut. And the only thing I really want to say here is that the vagus nerve modulates one of the many things it does is modulate our sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous system. So that when we sense threat or danger or extreme stress in our environment, if that becomes too extreme, then our bodies go into what's known as the fight, flight, and freeze modes, right? And the opposite of that, obviously, is when we're feeling very, very safe. That's when sometimes our parasympathetic nervous system is activated. Sometimes it's not. When we're feeling really safe and calm is when the vagus nerve is modulating that. It's just important to know that the more stressed out you feel, sometimes when it feels so overwhelming, when it feels like there's absolutely nothing you can do, it doesn't always happen, but we're just at risk of trauma. We're at risk of that fight, flight, and freeze, which are really compromising states from physiological perspectives. And I just want to say this briefly, for those of you who are watching live, or if you're watching this on a recording, we're going through unprecedented times right now. We're going through a global pandemic, and in many ways, it's okay to not be okay. If you're in shelter in place, if you're in a quarantine in your state or wherever you're watching this from, it's natural sometimes to feel more tired, to feel more lethargic, to feel unmotivated. That doesn't mean anything is wrong with you, actually. That's a very normal response to something like an unprecedented global pandemic. And sometimes it's not that you're being traumatized, because in so many ways that's in the eye of the beholder. Different people react to different things differently, right? But it's on that spectrum of stress that the vagus nerve modulates, that when we can't do anything, we have absolutely no control over this pandemic, it's sometimes natural to freeze up in some ways. And so I just wanted to say that because, there's a lot of memes going out on social media saying things like, You know, if you, during this quarantine time, if you don't pick up a new skill or start your new business idea, you never lack time, you lack discipline or something like that. And as a trauma psychologist, that's really the wrong thing to be pushing out right now, because it's so natural for a lot of us to feel more lethargic, to feel unmotivated on one end of the spectrum. And then for some of us, the uncertainty, the unknowingness could even cause even more extreme stress and anxiety. Mica and I work with folks who, you know, I work with a lot of teenagers, and they're not having a graduation this year. A lot of these ritualistic events that happen that help people get to the next step aren't happening. And parents are worried, you know, are my kids going to go back to school next year, et cetera, et cetera. So this is me just saying, in many ways, it's good that you're here. It's good that you're trying to boost your own resilience, but to be tender with yourself, to not be too hard on yourself if you're not, you know, uber motivated and have the perfect productivity schedule. We're here to help you with that a little bit. So let's talk about what resilience is. It's probably a good idea to define this first and foremost. And right now you're seeing on your screen a picture of a rose or a flower growing in not so conducive, a not so conducive context for a flower to grow in, right? It's growing in a crack in concrete. And resilience is essentially the ability, generally defined, it's the ability to overcome difficulty. So this flower, you know, it didn't have nice, rich soil all around it, right? It's hard to find a crack to sprout, to then grow and flourish. That's what resilience is. It's overcoming the stressors in your environment. It's overcoming the difficulty to still kind of maintain and be resilient, in some way push back against that difficulty. One of the therapists and innovators in this field who I really love and respect his work a lot is a guy named Bruce Perry. If you've ever been traumatized, if your kids have ever been traumatized, his book, The Boy Who Was Raised as a Dog, is a really, really helpful book. It's very easy to read. It's not like written in an academic way. It's written in a very simple way that you can consume the information. And Bruce Perry talks about the key kind of like contributors to resilience developing ideally. And he talks about 3 factors. One of them is moderate stress. So for example, if you're so stressed out and there's such extreme stress in your environment, then our systems have the tendency to get modulated by that vagus nerve, as I was talking about before, into that fight, flight, or freeze state, right? And if this stress is so little that it's not a big deal at all, then there's no difficulty, there's no overcoming adversity in any way, right? So moderate stress, predictability, and controllability are the 3 things that are helpful in resilience building. And that's why it's hard in times like this, in a pandemic, for those of you who are dealing with this, who also have other anxiety and trauma and other issues that you're dealing with, it can tend to exacerbate those issues, and everything can feel more unpredictable, more chaotic, and less controllable. And while we can't help you control the pandemic, because none of us can control the pandemic, we're going to talk about a few tips today that can help develop inner predictability, both inside of yourself and in your home. Because even if you target that a little bit and can't control what's going on outside of you, bringing routines into your daily life brings a little bit of a sense of control, a little bit of a sense of predictability, and learning to manage your own stress first helps take that stress from an 8 or a 9 or a 10 in terms of a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being the most extreme, maybe down to a 5 or a 6 or a 7, right? It's not going to take it away, but it helps you regulate it. And then it helps those conditions arise that build that resilience over time. So whereas resilience is the ability to overcome difficulty, self-care are the strategies that when you practice them routinely over time, those are the things that build resilience. So the simple definition that I really like to adhere to is, it's just plain simply the practice of preserving your own health. That could be your mental health, your emotional health, your spiritual, social health, whatever it is, right? That's what self-care is. You're taking care of yourself. I'm going to break that down into 4 more buckets where I really like to think about both the inner and the outer ways in which we can do that, right? The things that we can do by ourselves individually, the things that sometimes take the social or the interpersonal, and give you a little bit of a framework to think about is the one or two or three things that I can do for myself to practice personal parental self-care that can then translate into family self-care and resilience. So the first thing is the regular cultivation of that relaxation response. Remember, the parasympathetic nervous system that gets activated. That's when we feel calm and relaxed. If you can find a way to do that regularly, that can be a really good thing, right? Sometimes deep breathing can be a way you can do it all by yourself with nobody else. Slow, deep breaths in, slow, deep breaths out. Massage can be a way to feel relaxed, right? Obviously, right now during a pandemic, you're probably not going out to get a massage. That's why I'm focusing a little bit more on the inner skills. But anything that helps you relax routinely is a good bucket of self-care. On the other side of the spectrum is effortful training. So it may not feel good to exercise all the time. We may not feel motivated to have a healthy diet all the time. It may be difficult to have a routine, a sleep routine that we adhere to that's regimented. And those things may not feel good in every moment, but there's a payoff, right? That's what effortful training is. Mindfulness practice is a great effortful training self-care tool, because while sometimes we may feel relaxed, if you do it for long enough, there's going to be other times where it gets really hard and you don't want to do it and you don't feel motivated. But the more you do it routinely, you build the skill over time, you become proficient in it, and that's what essentially helps you in the long run develop resilience. The third bucket is creative expression. This is its namesake. It's essentially anything you can do that makes you feel innovated, inspired, creative, right? Painting, singing, music, writing, whatever it is you do, right? I like to create presentations like this. I know that's kind of weird, but like I love being in a teaching role. It's a good break from being a one-on-one therapist or a family therapist, and I feel really creative when I get to make these presentations, right? So find something that helps you feel creative. And then finally, social connection. During these times of social distancing, we are actually supposed to be physically distant, but it's good to maintain some type of social connection, right? There's a lot of these, virtual webinar or virtual meetings that people are having with their friends, with their family, which is a great, great thing. And it's important to know that in some way, shape, or form, your extended family, your work colleagues, your friends, there's still a community out there, and it's important to be able to be connected to them. The last thing I want to say about that is essentially, some of us are introverts, some of us are extroverts. During this quarantine, for the introverts, it may not be as hard as it is for the extroverts. So if you're introverted, I definitely don't want you to think I'm saying you should go like have 100 Zoom or Skype sessions or something like that. Know yourself and just make sure you maintain the right type of balance between being isolated and being with the self versus being with other people too, because it's okay to not jump on that craze. It's just important to know where you fall on that spectrum so that you can practice adequate self-care in that regard. This is just a little kind of map, conceptual map of how when stress arises, we start with experimenting with self-care strategies, some of the things we talked about before. I'm going to walk you through one of those techniques in a moment. And then with routine over time, this is one of the most important things. That's what creates the predictability. With routine over time, you start to develop proficiency. And when you develop proficiency in some of those tools, then that's when resilience occurs, right? And this is your personal parental or your personal self-care within your family system. The way in which that helps to develop familial resistance or resilience, is that your personal parental self-care routine leads to your own resilience. You act as a model for the rest of your family. So it's not just that you teach them the things that you do, which you can do, and we'll talk about that in a moment, but literally just by helping yourself out to regulate your stress, that changes your system so that you can be more present, more attuned to your family, and that's one of the many factors that lead to familial resilience. One last bit of background that I want to go over, and I totally know that I'm zooming through this really fast, so fear not, this is being recorded, and Haley and our partners at Modern Health are going to be able to get you those recorded resources when it makes sense. so that you know you can always come back to these. The last kind of bit of background before we get into a pragmatic tool that that I'd love for you to walk away with is, it's just good to know that with self-care strategies, some self-care strategies will be considered like lean in strategies, and that's where you're facing the anxiety, you're confronting the stress, you're sitting with whatever is coming up with you kind of head on. There's also on the other side of the spectrum lean out strategies, which could be considered escapism or avoidance strategies. Now, I want to be very clear here. One of these is not better than the other. It's really important to be balanced. We don't want, if you are feeling so extremely stressed out, and the only thing that you do is practice mindfulness and sit with that stress, especially if you have other trauma, especially if you've been dealing with anxiety and depression or other issues. Sometimes that can feel like you're jumping into the deep end of the pool and you don't know how to swim, right? And that's not a healthy relationship with learning how to be um, present to yourself and your struggles. A healthy relationship would be to dip your toe in the pool on the shallow side and slowly walk into that, right? But on the other hand, we don't want to be too heavy on the escapism strategies as well, because if you just do things to avoid how you're feeling, then you'll never really be able to learn how to regulate those feelings and develop that resilience. For example, a lot of people like to quote unquote unwind with a glass of wine. And while that can be fine and healthy for some people, for other people that leads to addiction because they kind of jump off the deep end on that side of the spectrum. So just really important to know that me as a therapist, I tend to emphasize lean in strategies, but that's because I'm a therapist and I get to work with people one-on-one or with their families, right? Like they have professional support. When you're doing this on your own, you want to make sure you have a healthy dose of both of those types of strategies. And it's also important to know, this is the last thing I'll say, that all of the bullet points you're seeing on your screen right here, this is somewhat in the eye of the beholder with these specific strategies, right? Like gardening, for example, I have under the lean out because you could say, I'm feeling really stressed out. I just don't want to think about this right now, so I'm going to go garden, right? But you could also say, I'm feeling really stressed out and I'm going to tackle this head on with the intervention of, I'm doing gardening as a way to practice this self-care in the moment and deal with this stress where it's kind of still top of mind. And then in that sense, it might be considered a lean in strategy. So it just really depends on what you're actually doing with your mind in the moments of practicing these self-care and resilience tools. So I want to kind of the last thing, or not the last thing, but second to last thing I want to do before we leave today, or before I kick it off to Mica, is I want to give you a concrete tool that you can walk away with. And one of the things that I'm best known for is teaching mindfulness. I've for many years, if you were to Google me, you would find that I do a lot of work with incarcerated youth. I've taught mindfulness and meditation to anybody from incarcerated youth to high-level executives at companies that, you know, places like where that Modern Health employs and other types of places contracts with, right? And so this is one of my passions because it was something that I used to help turn my life around from a life of trouble and addiction and trauma and anger to being able to transform and to regulate myself and do what I do today. So I wanted to just share a short practice with you. And first thing I want to do is define what mindfulness is, because I am a trainer and I go around the whole country, the whole world actually, and I work with both youth and other professionals. And the biggest misconception I hear is that mindfulness is sitting down, taking deep breaths and trying to calm down. That would be considered a calming strategy. There's nothing wrong with that, but that's not what mindfulness is. Mindfulness is a little bit different. And I want to just define it through a metaphor that I really love. I think you can still see me in the corner. I'm holding my meditation bell right now. I'm going to define mindfulness through a metaphor that I love called the lion mind versus dog mind metaphor. And so I'm holding my bell. Let's say that this bell was a bone and I was standing in front of this cute little dog that you're seeing right now. And I wave the bone in front of the dog's face. And then I throw the bone 10 yards to the right. What do you think the dog would do? You could answer in the chat if you're watching live. I'm not looking at the chat, but probably what most people say is the dog would go and get the bone, right? That's probably what would happen for the most part. Now, let's say I'm standing in front of this lion. I don't know why I would ever be standing physically in front of a lion like this, but let's say I'm standing in front of a lion and I wave the bone in the lion's face, and I throw the bone 10 yards to the left. What do you think the lion would do? Well, most of the time, doesn't matter if I'm working with a bunch of high-level executives or a bunch of incarcerated youth. When I'm doing a mindfulness group, they say the lion would eat you, the lion would come after you, the lion would not get the bone. The point that I always make is the lion could come after me, right? There's a fundamental difference between the mind of the lion and the mind of the dog. When I'm waving the bone in the dog's face, the dog's eyes are completely locked on the bone. It does whatever the bone does. It has complete tunnel vision. So if I control the bone, I control the dog's reality. It's very different with the lion. When I'm waving the bone in the lion's face, the eyes of the lion, it's not that the lion can't see the bone. The lion sees the bone, but the eyes of the lion are probably clocked right on me. And that gives the lion more autonomy because the lion can see the bone. The lion can see the larger reality. There's this person with an arm connected to the bone, with a body that's waving the bone in my face. If the lion thought like a human being, it might think something like, what the heck is this person doing? I could just eat you. You have more bones in your body than you're holding in your hand, or something like that, right? That gives the lion choicefulness. That gives the lion autonomy. The analogy for mindfulness in our experience as human beings is that, let's say, anger or anxiety or a thought or image or depression or something strong arises inside of ourselves. When anger arises inside of me, if I react with the mind of the puppy or the dog, I do whatever it is I do when I get angry. If I curse, I curse. If I fight, I fight. If I yell, whatever it is I do, it just automatically happens, right? If I respond with the mind of the lion, when anger arises inside of me, I might have the thought of, I'm angry right now, which is different. It's not an automatic reaction, right? It's like, I'm angry right now. There's a little tiny bit of distance between me and the emotion itself. Or I might have the thought of, I've been angry before, I'll be angry again. This is impermanent, right? It's not going to last forever. Or I might just have that as an insight and not an articulated thought, right? But that further disidentifies me from the anger, from the emotion, from the thought. I'm not my thoughts. I'm not my anger. They are experiences that arise inside of me. And I can train myself to get good at doing that. And that space is what helps me to be mindful. The lion mind is what mindfulness is. So notice that what I said and what I didn't say, right? Again, the biggest misconception is that when that I hear across the country is that when I practice mindfulness, I need to calm down. Or I can't practice mindfulness because my mind is going a million miles an hour, right? Untrue. That means it's difficult for you to practice calming strategies, which again, those are great techniques that you can get good at. But what if you can't calm down? Sometimes our systems won't let us. That's how trauma, that's how the stress response works internally, right? All mindfulness is present moment awareness with an attitude of non-judgmental, non-reactive awareness. The main underlying tool that we're using is what's called equanimity. So I can be practicing mindfulness and I can be really calm. I could have a flurry of thoughts. I could be feeling physical sensations. The goal is not to just be blank and clear. The goal is to be with what's coming up. And when you do that over time and learn how to practice it and practice that non-reactivity and that equanimity, that's what develops internal resilience towards those emotions, which will help develop your overall emotional resilience as a parent, which will overall impact your familial resilience as well. A quick note, you don't need to meditate to practice mindfulness. Again, the definition is present moment, non-reactive awareness. You can be doing that right now as we're talking. You can be doing that when you're taking a walk. You can be doing that when you're talking to a colleague, a supervisor. You can be trying or attempting to do it when one of your children is having a meltdown at home, right? Mindfulness meditation is kind of like the formal way to train it, whereas daily mindfulness is where we can incorporate it into our lives. And I want to just take you through a very quick mindful breathing activity just for a minute or two, just so you can get a sense of what that formal training looks like, because the more you do that, the more you put that into your routine predictably, the more that self-care and resilience will grow inside of you. So what I want to invite you to do just for a moment is, if you can, wherever you're sitting right now, find a comfortable sitting position. It's good to have your feet flat on the floor. It's good to have somewhat of a straight back. And again, if you've got your kids running around in the background or something like that, it's totally okay. You know, the folks at Modern Health are recording this so you can have this resource later. But it's good to sit somewhat straight just for your breathing. I also want to invite you to close your eyes, but you absolutely 100% do not have to close your eyes if you don't want to. If you keep them open, I would say just let your eyes kind of have a soft gaze, a couple of feet in front of you. And I'm just going to take us through a mindful breathing activity for about a minute or a minute and a half. And then we'll talk about it, and I'll kind of wrap my piece up before passing it to Mica. So when you hear the sound of the bell, what I want to invite you to do is just start by taking a few breaths in and a few breaths out, and then just wait for further instructions. And again, we'll just do this for a minute or so. Breathing in and breathing out. Just take a few moments and notice where it's easiest to sense your breath. That might be in the nostrils, feeling the actual touch of the air as you breathe in and breathe out. It might be feeling the expansion and contraction of the belly or the chest. Wherever it's easiest, just let your awareness rest right there. Breathing in and breathing out. Just breathe naturally. You might notice after a few breaths in and out that the mind begins to wander and you think of things other than the breath. Thoughts will arise, images, noises from your environment. Whenever that happens, no need to think you're doing anything wrong. It's very normal for the mind to wander. When you notice the wandering mind, just redirect your breath right back to that area where it's easiest to sense your breathing, the nostrils, the belly, the chest. That's your anchor point. That's your beacon to this present moment. Breathing in and breathing out. Your mind may be calm and serene. Your mind may be jumbled and overwhelmed with thinking, or anywhere in between. Whatever it is, that's okay. We just use the breath to be present to what is. Breathing in and breathing out. In a moment, I'll ring the bell, and when I do, I just want to invite you to listen to the sound of the bell until you can't hear it any longer, or until it's no longer there. All right, so thank you for doing that. There is a lot that I could say on this, and I just want to invite you to think about how you're feeling right now. But we'll have to save the kind of deep dive into that practice for another time, just because I want to get through the rest of my content and kind of hand this off for Mica, and I'm getting close to kind of my time here. I told you this before, but a lot of people that I work with, when it comes to, a lot of people come to me and say, I want to learn to develop a mindfulness routine like that and get good at it and get the benefits of self-care. but they say I'm too busy or I can't get my self-care strategies to stick. And so I'm going to encapsulate just in a couple of minutes a few of the many things that I help them do to get their personal self-care strategies to stick. The first thing is writing down your goals. When you write down your goals, you're actually encoding in your memory to remind yourself of those goals better. One thing you can do is write down your goals. I want to practice mindfulness, or I want to garden twice a week, or whatever it is. Write them down and post it somewhere where you can visibly see that. That'll be a cue in your environment that will remind you. Another thing you can try, which is a step higher, which is more of a practice, but will result in better outcome, is to write down your goals in a journal every day. So every day you write down what your goals are, even if it's the same thing. I have a goal to practice mindfulness meditation for 7 minutes a day, 3 days a week. You would still write that down every day. That's one of the things that can be really helpful. The other two things come from a book called Atomic Habits, and I'm a fan of this author. His name is James Clear. He talks about the 2-minute rule and habit stacking. I'm going to go out of order here, but the 2-minute rule is when you're just starting with a new habit, when you're starting with something you want to develop from the start, like mindfulness, for example. Start with something that's 2 minutes or less. So it may not be a good idea to say, I want to meditate for 15 minutes a day. That can get overwhelming. It can feel like a chore sometimes. If you just do 1 or 2 minutes, it can be a lot easier to put that in your mental framework as, yeah, it's only a minute, I can do this, right? And then you gain momentum with it, and then you can add on later. The other piece is what's called habit stacking, and I'm a big fan of this. And this is essentially associating one thing that you already do naturally, easily, without effort, with something else that you are trying to implement, right? Or I said that backwards, but essentially the new skill that you want to implement, mindfulness, let's just say, I'll go with that example, you associate that with something you do naturally without a lot of effort. So I was just working with a client who every day around noon during the quarantine just took a walk to the park, by his apartment, right? And it was very easy for him to do that. It didn't feel like a chore. It was just something he did. He had the momentum there, but he was really struggling with developing a mindfulness practice, which is what he wanted to do. It was one of his goals. So I said, well, what do you do when you go to the park? He said, well, I go to the park. I just stay there for a minute or two. I sit on the bench and then I come back, right? Because it was only a block or two away. And I said, well, what about when you go to the park and you sit on the bench, you just assume the meditative posture for a moment and you practice 1 to 2 minutes of formalized mindful breathing. Is that possible? He said, yeah, that's very possible. As a matter of fact, it sounds really easy. Fast forward a couple of weeks, he was able to do that and implement that and actually start this new mindfulness meditation routine. That's what habit stacking is. So find something that you could stack the thing you want to develop onto something else that you do naturally. And that other thing that you do naturally and easily will be that cue for you to be like, yeah, I can do this 1 or 2 minutes right now. Again, there's a lot more to this, but we're just keeping it brief for this presentation. It's just kind of like 3 quick tips that can help you get started with making the routine stick. And again, the routine, the predictability, that's what's going to help you build that resilience along with the tools themselves. So I just want to pause for a moment because I'm about to kick it over to Mica, and I just want to invite you to notice how you feel after this first portion of the presentation. If you have any questions, you can write them in the chat or in the Q&A. We'll come back to that. And I'm going to stop sharing my screen right now so that Mica can share his screen and get on with his portion of the presentation.
All right. Can y'all see and hear okay? All right. Thumbs up. All right. Thanks so much. Okay. So I wanted to start with this idea of reassuring younger kids. Now we're transitioning from the self-care and developing your own parental resilience and moving that more into the family realm. And one thing that I think it's really important to point out is that there's a difference in terms of helping to reassure young kids versus older kids and teens. And I like to use a little visual to explain that. So we basically as parents have 2 large strategies for helping our kids. And one is talking to them, and the other is doing things with them and for them, or in their presence. And so with younger kids, because their cognitive faculties are not as well developed as older kids or teenagers, what we say to them often is less impactful than what we're doing for them and with them, and in particular, how we're doing those things. And I think it's just important to remember that the words are good, and we're going to go over specific words to use to talk with your kid about the pandemic and about how life is now. But similar to what Sam was saying before, modeling that self-care goes a long way in helping the child feel reassured that things, even though they're different, are still safe. So just a little comparison, reassuring older kids, we see there that the talking, because again, of their more advanced cognitive skills, that the talking plays a bigger role in helping fortify and reassure them. But that the doing part, the actions that we take with them, around them, for them, is still more important. And we'll see more of these examples in the following slides. So let's talk first about helping kids with their stress and managing their stress, in particular at this time. What any child therapist or child psychologist will tell you is that one of the most powerful ways to help a child develop resilience is to be responsive to their moments of distress. The idea is that you being, as parents, if we're responsive in general, and we help our kids when they are distressed and angry, afraid, sad, whatever it may be, that they come to internalize our helping. And then they can actually do that on their own to a certain extent, or when they're older, seek out other appropriate people for that kind of emotional support. But one thing I think that we often forget to highlight for parents is that it's really helpful to responding to our kids' distress. It's helpful to anticipate and accept their distress as well, especially at this time. So Sam, I think one of the things that he was communicating really is this attitude of acceptance, towards how you're functioning right now in this stressful context. And it's good to be able to offer that same amount or that same quality of acceptance to your kids when they're struggling too. And what I find when I'm working with families is that it helps to really try and anticipate some of these things too. And by now, probably many of you all are here because, the stuff has already hit the fan with your kids. And so you may not have anticipated it, but you can anticipate that there's more to come, more shifts, more ups and downs as we progress through this unusual time. So one of the things to anticipate, if you haven't seen it already, is potential regression in behavior or abilities. An example for a 3-year-old, for example, who was potty trained may start having accidents again, either in the day or night because of the increased stress, or with an elementary school age kid who's long since been sleeping in their own room independently may start to want to sleep in your room again for that extra sense of security. And one thing that you might see, for example, with older kids, Sam mentioned about he mentioned the losses that many tweens and teens are experiencing right now. I'm thinking mostly about like 8th graders and seniors in high school who have lost their competitions, their dance, their athletics, their rituals and graduations. These are big losses. And so you may see more sadness, isolation, irritability, anxiety. And I think it's really helpful to think about those things as a form of grief. The grief responses to what they've lost. And if you have that in your mind, it makes it more easy for you to be able to respond to the distress that probably most kids are experiencing right now. And in terms of getting to the point where you can put your best foot forward in responding to the distress, I really think it's helpful to try to respond when you're not feeling triggered emotionally yourself. The way it works in pretty much all families is when a child is upset, and emotionally dysregulated, throwing a tantrum, slamming doors. It's not easy for us as parents to be calm in those moments. We usually have an emotional response. And so what I find with the families that I work with is that the most helpful thing, the starting point, is to respond when you're feeling calm. So that may mean not responding right away. The best scenario, and this is the hard to achieve early on when you don't have practice doing it, the best scenario is to wait until both you and your child are calm. And the sequence, it's a bit oversimplified, but I think it's a helpful sequence to keep in mind. And this again comes from Bruce Perry, I think he's actually a MD, PhD, that Sam referenced earlier. It's getting calm, starting with getting calm, then focusing on connecting emotionally, and then ideally going into a third step of doing some problem solving. So the way that might look with a 3-year-old who's having a tantrum because his 4-year-old or his 5-year-old brother took back his toy that the 3-year-old had been playing with for 45 minutes. And then your 3-year-old starts to throw a tantrum. And then you feel triggered. You feel annoyed because you know your 5-year-old would like a turn, and that feels fair to you. So one of the things you might do is just wait for a little bit. Stay near your 3-year-old, make sure that he's safe and not banging his head or anything as he flails on the ground. Let him calm down, get to a place where he's a little bit more emotionally regulated, and then come up to him. And one reliable way of connecting emotionally is to offer some empathy, not necessarily for the behavior, but for the feeling. And you might say something like, I know you really wanted to keep playing with your brother's toy. You have a lot of fun when you get to play with his toys. And then from there, once the emotional connection is established and the child feels a certain amount of understanding for their feelings, again, not their behavior, then that's when you can move towards problem solving and help them think, so you can't have the toy now. What would you like to do instead? Do you want to look at another toy, or would you like to ask your brother for a turn when he's done? So something like that, to move through those 3 steps of getting calm, connecting emotionally, and problem solving. And you can use these things for 13-year-olds, for 15-year-olds too, who are more likely going to be not throwing tantrums per se, but doing things like slamming the door or talking back or arguing. First getting calm before you offer empathy, and then getting into the more collaborative problem solving. Now, in terms of coming back to the talking, using language as a way of helping kids feel safer and reassured at this time. The big thing really is, the big theme is, or themes are safety, reassurance, and consistency. These are the things that build the resilience that Sam was talking about before. Now I'll give you examples at each stage of development. But generally speaking, we want to give, when appropriate, brief, concrete answers if our kids have any questions, and then be really thoughtful, really observant of how they seem to take it in, because that will give you the cue. If your kid's not asking follow-up questions, or just if you feel like you need to modulate it, it's really good to pay attention to how they take it in, knowing that communicating to your kids an open dialogue is the most helpful thing, because our kids are thinking about this stuff. They're not just thinking about it once. It's not that they're thinking about it all the time either, but we want to give them the idea that we are open to discussing it, even if we don't have all the answers. And when Sam was talking earlier about modeling the self-care practices, it's a lot of parents know that word, but it's really a psychological term. It's really just about showing them your resilience practices. So it could be implicit, like you're exercising and your child is watching you, just like, my mom is exercising, or whatever it is. Or it could be, dad getting on a Zoom call with a buddy of his and letting the kids know that, I was feeling a little sad, so I wanted to talk to my friend to help me feel better. These are all ways of modeling, of showing your kids that when we feel stressed, we have positive things that we can do. And again, the idea is that with repetition and time, our children start to learn that they can do that for themselves too. And the last thing I want to say in terms of the talking portion here before we get into the specific examples is that right now, I don't have any firm data on this, but it looks to me when I check in, it's like 80 to 90% of media right now is COVID media. And so as protectors of our children, one of the roles that we have typically in non-pandemic times is we filter the outside world for our kids so that they don't get overwhelmed by what they see from the world. And that's really important now. In some ways it's easier, in some ways it's harder. It's easier because our kids are literally not really going out in the world too much. But it's harder because we may want to be informed about the news and what's happening with vaccines and treatments and things like that. And that may actually be helpful to us as adults, but we need to protect our kids from that. So I really encourage parents right now to be limiting, if not eliminating totally, the COVID-related media that our kids are exposed to, in particular the young ones. It's not possible so much with the older ones, with the teens who have access to their own phones and things like that, but we'll get into that in just a minute. And then the last thing I think that's really important is our needs as adults may be a little bit different than our kids. And so we may need to talk about some of what we're learning or some of the news stories we're seeing about COVID-19. And so it can be helpful to talk with our partners, our spouses, our friends about this. It's just really important to make sure that we're doing it out of earshot of the kids, because if we're not, then we're not able to do that filtering that all of us want and need to do to keep our kids sort of protected from being overwhelmed. So let's talk briefly about how to talk about this stuff at each stage of development. So for toddlers, I'm talking like, 0, 1 to 4 range. So we want to think first about prioritizing safety and simplicity when we're talking to our little ones. So if you haven't yet, or even if you gave your kids some explanation before, it could be helpful to return to something like this, an overall statement of what's happening. Something like, we're staying home mostly now because some people are sick. When the people aren't sick anymore, then we can do more of the things we used to, like play with friends. Or if your little one is starting to be curious or even a little afraid of what's happening with, most people wearing masks now, even out in the neighborhood, you might give them a simple explanation like, sometimes we wear masks because they help us not get sick. And with elementary schoolers, of course, you want to continue with simple reassurances, simple explanations, but they're starting to develop the cognitive abilities to reflect a little bit more. They may have learned a little bit about the pandemic or the virus before school ended for them. And so it can be good to start a little Q&A with them. So again, returning to a brief explanation of what's happening now, you might say something like, we're keeping our distance from others right now so that we don't share germs with each other and maybe get sick. The doctors say that washing our hands and wearing masks helps us stay healthy too. And then to add in or to extend the dialogue a bit, you might say something like, do you have any questions for me about the virus or staying home? So you're communicating implicitly that you welcome their thoughts and you welcome their questions. Now, continuing down the spectrum towards middle schoolers, towards more capacity for reflection and using cognitive abilities to calm themselves, it's appropriate, I find, to really think about the back and forth dialogue with your middle schoolers, getting in more into the questions to the extent that they do want to talk about it, because they're not always going to be in the mood to talk about it. So even starting off simply with a really open-ended question like, what do you think about all this? Or tapping yourself as a resource for them. Do you have any questions for me? And then finally, the last example is, do you need any help thinking about how to stay connected with your friends? So the reason why I put that one in is, again, to communicate the importance of staying connected. And of course, by middle school, a lot of our kids know more than we do about technology, but it is helpful just because of the stress they're under, they might not be thinking about all of the different ways that they could stay connected to their friends. Or they might not be organized enough to be scheduling some of these Zoom play dates or FaceTime with their friends or whatever other communication app they might use. Even going old school like writing letters could be something helpful. Now, with high schoolers, again, returning to this idea of grief and the idea of loss, they really are giving up the most in their social world right now. So I think one thing that can be fortifying and reassuring to them is really treating them as a kind of partner in this process and really trying to stimulate their sense of agency. Developmentally speaking, they are the most independent, in the 0 to 18 range, and it's normal and appropriate for them to spend more time out of the house and to have more of a life outside of the house than their younger peers and siblings do. So one of the ways to help with this grief and this sense of loss is to really treat them as a partner in this, not necessarily as an emotional partner where you're going to them and sharing your doubts and fears and things like that, but more as like an instrumental partner. So thinking about what are the things you can do to make things better together for the family. And so you might ask something like, what have you been learning about the shelter at home? Do you have any specific worries? And this is coming back to what I mentioned before about how you can't really, and maybe you shouldn't be filtering all of the things, all of the media, the COVID-related media that your kids are getting exposed to. They may need you to be a partner in reflecting on how much of that media they're taking in, depending on their anxiety and things like that. But it's a good way of staying in touch with, okay, what do they know? And, what they know could actually be helpful for the actions that your family takes. And then helping them stay connected to the family instead of telling them like, hey, we're going to do this family activity now. We're going to do this family ritual. I think it's more helpful, again, tapping their independence and agency to be collaborative and say something like, do you have any ideas for how we can enjoy some family time while we're sheltering at home? Hold on a second. I got stuck here. Okay, there we go. So returning to this idea of making things predictable. Again, the more predictable things are, the more likely we'll be to develop resilience. And as Sam said before, there's so many things that we could go into, but we really wanted to give you some of the essential pieces in this short time. And in my experience working with families, it's really powerful to see kids playing with each other, siblings playing with each other, but also playing with their parents. And the way that I think about it is that family play is a kind of resilience in action. Kids use play for a variety of reasons, but definitely during stressful times, kids use play as a stress management tactic. It's not that they're aware they're doing it, but it's a way for them to both practice leaning out strategies to sort of avoid some of the stress of the time. It's also sometimes a way for them to practice leaning in strategies. So one thing you might see with a 4-year-old, they know that there's some sort of disease out there and they know that some people are getting sick. And so what they do is they play doctor. They want to play doctor with mommy and daddy or with their siblings. And that's a good way for them to lean into some of the uncertainty and some of the questions that they have. And what I always tell parents, because, we think of play as normal and we think it's cute and things like that, but it's actually a really powerful psychological tool that lowers kids' stress. And it's very reassuring for kids when their parents are able to play with them. Now, I know the context here is that so many parents are the ones, I know this is weird to say, but the ones who are lucky and still have their jobs, they're having to do their job, probably from home unless you're an essential worker. And then you're also having to now homeschool your kids. And as somebody who was homeschooled and did homeschooling earlier in my life as a teacher, I can tell you that is hard. That's not an easy job to divide and share with another full-time career. So what I'm hearing from families now is that, look, we're tired. We got this extra role. We're trying to figure it out, and keep our head above water. And what I tell families is like, look, you don't have to be the parent of the year, especially not now. What I'm thinking about is if you're feeling lethargic, if you're feeling lazy, you've homeschooled your kid, it's 5 o'clock, you've done a few hours of your work and you still got more to do, and you're feeling wiped and y'all haven't played yet, what I'm suggesting is actually just go lay down on the couch, lay down on the floor next to your kids, and let them play. And you stay involved just verbally, narrating what they're doing, communicating your interest in a very low energy way, just staying connected to them emotionally. That is enough, I think, in many circumstances to help the kids feel like, oh, we're connected as a family. And whenever a kid feels connected emotionally to their parents, that means that they feel safe. When they feel safe, it means they're developing resilience. So don't be shy about being a lazy partner in play. That can be helpful too. And then as I'm wrapping up now, I think really the most helpful thing, coming back to Sam's idea of making the self-care practices stick and writing down almost like this is a goal-setting activity. What we're recommending to families right now is to write a written plan. And now what I mean by a written plan is, so I don't want this to be a chore. I want this to be a resource for y'all. So the way we differentiate between an extra thing to do to be the perfect parent versus getting support to just being a good enough parent is we start simply. So Sam talked before about the idea of following a routine. So what I'm suggesting first is to make a written plan, just starting with consistent bedtimes and consistent meal times. So if we're taking care of our bodies first, that's a good way to anchor our day and to give our day a loose schedule. Now, after a week or two of practicing this and feeling success with consistent bedtimes and meal times, then you may add on some additional structure if that feels helpful to your family. So now I've encouraged you to use a routine, to create predictability, to follow some kind of schedule. And now I'm going to tell you what looks like the opposite, which is to allow for some flexibility. But there's a method to my madness here. What I'm encouraging parents to do is to maybe be a little flexible around some activities than you were before, because it's helpful for you as the parent. So again, returning to that scenario where it's 4 or 5 o'clock, you still have work to do, you're wiped out emotionally from helping your kids and maybe even playing with them. You might relax your screen time requirements and let your kid go a little longer than usual, especially if you have work to do or if you just need to take a break and you need a little time for yourself, and you know that your youngsters will be fine sitting in front of the TV watching some kids Netflix or some kids YouTube. And this is, again, to make sure that your needs are getting met as well as a parent. So as part of your plan, I think returning to this idea of family play, I would say even more broadly, trying to create the circumstances where you can have a little bit of fun every day. I know it's a hard one, and for many of you, that may seem like a distant goal, but I think my experience with kids is that they're actually kind of good at this. And so if you're feeling tired, if you're feeling like you don't have the emotional energy to do it, let them be the ones in charge of the play. And if you're able to follow and participate, even as I said before, in a lazy way, that could be good enough for right now. And that's good enough for your plan. And I'm also finding that because of the losses that kids are having, they really need to stay connected to their peers. It's Zoom calls, FaceTime calls, they're a poor substitute for sure. But staying connected, even if for 15, 20 minutes at a time, can be really helpful. So having that mindset of staying socially connected. And then the last thing, I know we're running short on time. The last thing I want to say before my very last slide is just encourage you to include in your plan some simple rituals if you're not doing them already. One of the things that we were doing in my family before the pandemic started that we've continued is just Friday night family movie night. And what I've discovered in these last few weeks is how much my kids are looking forward to that, and how much it can be Monday and they're thinking about Friday and they're excited about family movie night, what food we're going to have, what movie we're going to watch. And it's a way of boosting their mood, even when we're not participating in the ritual. So, it doesn't have to be movie night. It can be game night. It can be going for a walk together. But just the idea that doing some simple things together as a family. So to wrap it up, I want to, sorry, let me just change this real quick. To wrap it up, I want to leave you with a quote, and it was written, I found this a couple of weeks ago by a political science professor, and I really like what she said. Her name's Aisha Ahmad, and I thought it was really pertinent for this time. She wrote, "No sane person feels good during a global disaster, so be grateful for the discomfort of your sanity." And this comes back to Sam's idea before that right now, above all else, it's okay to not be okay. So don't expect yourself to be, a perfect caretaker of your kids or of yourself. And do practice that acceptance. Give yourself the gift of being kind to yourself internally. And that actually will help you as you build up your resilience capacity. So that's all I'll say for now. And I think I'm going to turn it back to, I think, Haley this time. Maybe Sam's going to say something too.
Yeah, well, thank you guys both so much. We've had a couple questions. I know we're a little over time, but we've had a couple questions come up. If you guys have a minute to answer those.
Sure. Yeah.
Awesome. The first one we got was, this one's pretty specific, but someone was saying they struggle a lot with trying to create activities that they think are age appropriate. And we kind of got to this more at the end and talking about COVID and how to do that age appropriately. But in terms of activities, they said, in other words, can you help me magically become an early childhood educator? So I think someone just struggling with figuring out how to fill their children's time right now.
Yeah, sure. I'll jump in. I'll start with that one. Yeah, I did see that question earlier. And, I think there's a number of different ways of approaching this. I think, but I want to come back to what I said before is it is great and thoughtful and helpful to think about activities for your kids. But what many kids are going to be able to do is they're going to be able to create, especially if they've had opportunities before, they're going to be able to create their own fun. And I think what a lot of parents don't know, especially if you're a new parent, this is only your first few years of parenting, your kid's 2, 3, 4 years old. It's really the simple things. The simple things are the best. I just got an email this morning from, I think it's called the Harvard Center for the Developing Child. And they have this metaphor of serve and return. And so the idea is that you're doing really simple things that go back and forth with your kid. It could be rolling a ball back and forth, literally. It could be playing with dolls. It could be racing cars. With slightly older kids, it could be, passing, like playing sports back and forth. The idea is just that you're kind of having this dialogue. It may not be a verbal dialogue, it could be a physical dialogue or an action dialogue. And those are really the best things for kids now. if you're looking for something, and really that's what kids should be learning in those first few years anyway. It's really social, emotional development that's the focus of most preschools, if we're talking about early childhood education. But if you're looking for something more concrete, then I would really encourage projects. Now, a lot of youngsters can't do too many projects, but some of the projects that they do in preschool involve learning, like, how to cut and how to draw and how to color and how to manipulate Play-Doh and things like that. I think it could be helpful for this parent to really just schedule a little time, maybe even write it into the family plan, to have a little time every day where they're playing that role of the early childhood educator, and they're doing something simple and fun with manipulatives, with something sensory. Could be water, could be cooked pasta. Let the kids make a little messy art, but it doesn't have to be like a 2 or 3 hour process, because young kids' attention spans don't last that long anyway. So hopefully that gives this parent a few ideas in the realm of, letting them lead. And then, if you want to, choosing some simple sensory, brief sensory projects that you could do at the same time every day.
Awesome. And then one more question that came through. Someone said that they see other parents posting about all the activities and teaching and things like that they're doing with kids on social media, and it's making them feel like they're not doing enough. And so just wondering if you have any advice on like that kind of comparison and how to make yourself feel better about what you're able to do.
Mm-hmm. Sam, do you want to jump in, or you want me to take that?
Yeah, I can just say something really briefly. Yeah, this kind of goes back to what we were saying before, and then I'll let you follow up after, Mica. But it's not that's another iteration of the example that I used before, where like on social media, you get all these like entrepreneurs saying things like you should be learning a new skill, or if you don't come out of this with a new language, then basically feel bad about yourself, essentially, right? And this is another iteration of that, where parents are like, here's my super parent schedule. Look how productive it is. And that's great, like in the sense that like they're doing that, but the unintended impact usually is that other parents feel some sense of guilt or shame or added stress because they're not doing that. And so first and foremost, I think the piece that I want to bring to this in my response is your own internal piece, because a lot of my part of the presentation today was on your own inner resilience. And as a parent, whatever your situation is, first and foremost, it's probably different than what that other person posting is, right? Like both you and your partner, if you have a partner, you may be at home working from home, like Mica said, and you have this added responsibility now of homeschooling your children. That can be a lot. So the first step is, when that sense of whatever comes up, whether it's guilt, whether it's shame, whether it's just added stress, when that comes up, when you're seeing other parents posting those things, just remind yourself that, you still love your children, that you're doing your best given the circumstances right now, and to be kind to yourself, to practice compassion towards yourself during these times is a really, really important first step. Because as Mica said, you do not need to be the perfect parent. As a matter of fact, in the psychotherapy world, there is a term called being the good enough parent. All you need to be is good enough to help your child develop a healthy emotional attachment to you, a healthy relationship to emotional awareness and emotional regulation, for them to grow up to be happy and successful. You don't have to be a super parent. You don't have to be a super mom or a super dad. So my piece is essentially like what I like to focus on with parents is, when that stuff comes up inside of you, prime yourself and tell yourself that it's okay that you're not doing all of that, and that to be kind and tender and compassionate with yourself is an important step. And so anything else you want to add, Mica?
Yeah. I mean, just sort of piggybacking on what you're saying, Sam, the expression that comes to my mind is that stuff you see on social media, it is a trap, not intentionally, but it is a trap that, gets you, that locks you in that sort of shame, envy, sort of, disappointment with yourself cycle. So my thought on that is to really, and this may not be very popular, but I would encourage the person asking this question to do some fasting from social media, because this is kind of one of those circumstances where, these compensatory responses of like, oh, look at how great of a parent I am, they're going to be exaggerated, right? And so, like Sam says, if it's helpful for some people to do that, then, more power to you. You should definitely do that if that's what's working for your family. But I think for the overwhelming majority of people, if there's a skill that to learn during this time that you come out of the pandemic with, it's exactly what Sam said. It's the self-compassion. I think that's way more valuable than learning to be an awesome early childhood educator or an awesome manager of your children's educational projects. I'll leave it there. I agree with Sam's point. Overall, if for a tiny percentage of people, you feel like putting things into action that way by being creative and doing these amazing projects and posting them online, if that's helpful to you, then I don't think you should hold back. But even in that context, really, really focus on being gentle on yourself, however those things turn out.
Awesome. Well, I think that's all the questions that came through. Thank you both so much for such a wonderful conversation and for some great advice during this difficult time. As a reminder to everyone listening, we have more sessions coming up, so you can check out community.modernhealth.com. And thanks so much for everyone attending, and thanks to our wonderful speakers.
Our pleasure. Thank you.
Absolutely. Have a great day. Thank you.
Take care.
Bye.